Hello, and welcome to the Camp Corner. Today, my special guest is Erik. Erik is our board president on our board of directors, and he's going to tell us a little bit about himself, his role at camp, and why he loves Lakeside so much. Let's go say hi to Erik.
Hi, Paige.
Tell us a little bit about you. Who is Erik?
Well, I am husband to Allison. I am father to Anna, Isaac, and Evan. I live in West Des Moines, Iowa, and I work at Faith Lutheran Church in Clive as the Director of Administration and Communication, which is a position I've had for about half of a year. Prior to that, I did about 20 years of youth ministry, music ministry at a couple of different congregations over the years, and am now learning a new role, but still very connected with ELCA congregations and its ministry partners like Lakeside.
Awesome. So I've actually had the pleasure of meeting your kids and hanging out with them here. I was just thinking the other day as I was thinking about talking with you today, I was like, okay, now Evan was the one who had to go to the hospital last summer.
Yeah, it had been, I was wondering who was going to fulfill the family legacy of making a trip to the Lakes Medical Center, because I was there when I was on staff as a counselor, and I'm told that I had an aunt or uncle that maybe went there back in the day when the camp was first getting started. So I was kind of like just waiting for that to happen, and Evan took care of that for us. But his I think he cut his finger.
Yeah.
Or his arm or something on the basketball hoop or something, which is not surprising, and he's recovered fully. So yeah, our kids are. It's a very strange summer for camp for sure, but also for our kids. But Anna is going to be a senior in high school. Isaac will be a sophomore, and Evan will be in 8th grade.
Wow. Well, tell us about your first experience at camp. So we talked about your kids a little bit, but when was the first time you experienced Lakeside?
Well, I came as a confirmation camper back in the early 90s. I think it was the summer of 92, but might be 93. In any case, I was there as a camper and had a really nice experience. Got to know some of the counselors. In fact, there are a few counselors who were there at that time who I got to know later in life, just as we crossed paths in other kind of ministry circles. And it was a really kind of cool, different environment for me. I also lost my retainer that week, so I was pretty nervous about that because, those little pieces of plastic can be really important for a young person. But other than that, my experience at confirmation camp was great. Got to know a lot of other kids from all over the state, and it was fun to be taught by other pastors. During the kind of teaching time, we'd rotate around and hear from other pastors. So that was kind of cool too.
It's always interesting to hear what parts of our experiences we remember. So like your retainer, like that doesn't seem like a super significant thing, or the pastors that you remember, things like that. But, very cool. So now you are on our board of directors. So kind of walk us through what happened between being a confirmation student all the way to now being on our board of directors.
Sure. Well, in the summer of 99, I worked as I was on the staff. It was kind of a tumultuous summer staff-wise. There were a lot of comings and goings of staff, and by the middle of the summer, we were a pretty skeleton crew. So ended up taking on a handful of different roles there, and then graduated college and started a family and all that stuff, and worked at a couple of churches that were not association members with Lakeside, and so my connection with Lakeside just kind of diminished. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, the church that I was working at the time, Capitol Hill Lutheran in Des Moines, were going to send some kids to Lakeside. I was like, oh, I remember Lakeside. I worked there for a summer. And so I had a really good experience there for several summers. And about 2 years ago, Pastor Cindy Johnson was there with her group from Carroll, Iowa, and she said that she would like me to consider being on the board of directors if they had some vacancies. And so I thought about it and prayed about it and talked with a few other people about what all that would entail, and said yes. And so I've been serving on the board now for a couple of years. And honestly, if you would have told me 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago, that I would be relating to Lakeside in this way, I would have been surprised. But I'm really grateful that it's kind of come to fruition in this way.
Cool. Yeah, it always seems like every time we think our last experience with camp has happened and ended, you somehow end up coming back at some point or another.
So true.
Yeah.
Yes. I, like I said, the summer that I worked there it wasn't like the worst summer of my life or anything, but it was not super relaxing. I mean, it was kind of stressful at times. And so when that summer was done, I didn't come back in subsequent summers, again, not because I was like, I really disliked Lakeside, but I just was ready for a different experience. And so as the years went on, I just kind of wondered, like, well, maybe that was a one and done sort of relationship. Like I went as a camper, worked there as a staff person, and now just kind of do other things. But it's funny how that pull back to camp can manifest itself in different ways.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I remember, so my second summer on staff, we always rang the bell before we left for the summer. Like we each had to ring the bell. And it was a really emotional time for me because I was like, this is it. I'm never going to see Lakeside again. And then a few months later, here I was, but it definitely wasn't part of the plan. But it's always such like I don't know, it's like coming home. That's what it always feels like to me. Yeah. So you're now our board president. So you've kind of had a role as a member and now a role as president. And so I kind of want to hear not only what does a board member do, but what's a board president do?
Well, that's a great question, and it's one that I have been asking a lot of. So we had our annual meeting of the camp on, I think it was February 29th, Leap Day. Yes. And that was when we, as a board, appointed our officers. And so I was and am happy to step into that role. But as we all know, within a couple of weeks, the world started to look very different, and specifically the state of Iowa and the Midwest started to look very differently in terms of how we functioned day to day. And so that has impacted, I think, the way that everybody on the board has related to the camp and in our role as leaders to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the camp, especially as it relates to the pandemic that we're experiencing. Those have been hard decisions, but none of them have been decisions that any of us thought we would be making when we came onto the board. And certainly for me in my current role, did not think that a conversation about canceling summer programming would even have been on the radar at the end of February. And then, 2 months later, that was the decision that we made. So kind of big picture, what a board president does is convenes the board, and for meetings, we kind of have normal, regular meetings about 5 times a year. But lately we've been having meetings more frequently than that, just to make sure we're making good decisions about programming, but also about stewardship of resources and kind of how we're going to continue to maintain as strong a financial position as we can, while also remembering that we are in the business of ministry. And so it's not only about dollars and cents, but we do some short-term planning to make sure that staff have what they need and that the facilities and the grounds have what they need. But then also we're doing a lot of long-range planning and trying to figure out how we can keep camp sustainable and vibrant for the next generation, let alone the next 5 to 10 years. So it's a lot of different conversations. Some of them are very, very micro and specific. And then others, like 30 seconds later, we're talking about very, very macro and very broad kinds of things. So I'm learning a lot in the last 4 months that I've been in this role, and the board and the staff have been really patient, I think, to kind of let us all figure out what the new normal is for now and possibly will be for the next few months.
Yeah, yeah. And as you're talking, it's interesting to, in my conversation with Hannah too, just very interesting to hear your perspective because we're in very different positions, but very involved in what Lakeside is. But it's interesting to hear even as you talked about how many different parts there are to camp and how many different layers there are. And I think that's something that'll be, I don't know, a different perspective for our campers and our camper families and stuff to hear because, you know, they just see the summer and they see the fun parts. And there are all these other aspects like, you know, we are a business. And so there's all the financial side to things and we have a lot of land. So there's this whole property, taking care of the property side of things. And so lots and lots of layers. And so I'm sure you've figured out it's hard to kind of balance all of those things too.
Right. Well, there are a lot of, you know, there are a lot of people who really love Lakeside. But what they love about Lakeside varies from person to person. You know, there are some for whom their only exposure and experience with Lakeside is through summertime programming. And so that is the lens through which they view that whole ministry is, you know, what kind of counselors are we going to have? What kind of program can we offer? You know, are we going to do scuba camp? Are we going to do canoeing camp? Are we, you know, what's confirmation camp going to look like? But it's a 52-week facility and a 52-week ministry, not just a 10 or 12-week one in the summer. Summer is still our big time, which is why it was such a heartbreaking decision to cancel summer programming because that is the time when the most number of people come to camp. It's when the greatest amount of exposure, not only to the ministry of the camp, but just for people to hear and experience the good news of Jesus in a place that is really special and is really different from the normal life. And so we know that summertime is and will continue to be one of our big priorities, probably the biggest priority. But we also need to live into being a year-round facility and a year-round place where ministry can happen. And sometimes that occurs through having staff that lead programs and activities. And other times that is us providing a venue and a space for other people to come in and kind of do their own thing. And, you know, we continue to try to find that balance, especially in a season of the camp's history where some of our resources are tight. And, but like you say, other resources like the land that we have and the lakefront property that we have is abundant. And it's this wonderful space that we have. So how we kind of use all those resources and gifts all for the big purpose of making camp a special place.
Yeah, very well said. So of all of those pieces that you have a role in, and maybe it's outside of any of the pieces you've said, but what is your favorite part of being on the board?
Well, so far it's been just being exposed to the different stories and different relationships that all the board members have with camp. You know, there are very few, I'm trying to think if any of the people on the board that I knew kind of from my time as a camper or a counselor. And so the people I've gotten to know are mostly new to me. And if I did know them before being on the board, it was not because of camp. It was because of other interactions. And so just learning from them why Lakeside is so special to them really helps me develop a more comprehensive understanding of what camp is. Because again, my experience as a camper and my one summer as a staff person provides me with a pretty narrow experience. Now, I've also had experiences as a youth minister and as a parent, and those things broaden my perspective, but it's not nearly the breadth and depth that everybody on the board has. And so for me to just hear, you know, sometimes we get kind of lost in the minutia of making important decisions, but but the moments when we can step back and say, you know, here's why camp is a meaningful place for me. And to hear them tell their story about how it shaped their faith and how it kind of helped them become the person that they are, That's the stuff that I really enjoy most, just in terms of getting to know the other people who are on the board.
Awesome. Those stories are like why we do what we do. To me, that's what it's all about. And it is really interesting. I mean, you said even for yourself, you had most of those people are new to you. And in my role, I find myself meeting new people all the time.
Sure.
Who, to me, I'm the new thing, you know? And so
Right.
they can tell me all these stories about things that have happened at Lakeside in the past that I have no knowledge of. But even through all the things that change throughout camp, the one thing that's always the same is people's love for Lakeside and how they see God here. And so that's what I hold on to, especially in times like this where, you know, we're not necessarily doing the work maybe we signed up to do, or
Right.
we're living in a different kind of ministry world. And so I hold on to those stories and those relationships because, like, yeah, that's why we do what we do, even when it's doesn't look like how we thought it might look, or even when it's a little challenging, or like that summer on staff you had where it's like, that was difficult. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so more of a personal question. Where is your favorite place on camp?
So interesting, because, you know, I have some really profound memories of when I was younger with the campfire space, which is now in a different location. And so it's interesting because I remember thinking like, oh, I'm really mad with the concept that they moved the campfire ring, because that place was like so emblazoned in my memory as being special with different moments, you know, songs or certain testimonial or the Christ hike or whatever that was, you know. But the first time that I came back as an adult and we had campfire worship down by the lake, I was like, I'm not mad about this at all. This is great. This is beautiful. And it's a great setting, and it made me really happy. So, you know, if you would have asked me this again, if you would have asked me this question 5 years ago, I would have said, well, the campfire ring, but where it used to be, you know, before they made the changes. And now, I love that. But I would say my favorite place right now is the chalet, also called the Miltner Retreat Center. And I think that in part because we've had the church that I was at before had a retreat there, and we were there in the midst of a big snowstorm, and it was gorgeous because we were all snowed in, and we had the fire going, and we had some really great Bible studies and conversations and silly times and all of that stuff. And that was probably a year and a half ago now, but that was just such a cool experience to have there. And then my family took some time to be there as well last summer, and as well as just the memory and the legacy of the Miltner family and the way that they have and continue to be a blessing to Lakeside, you know, through Roy and Frida's ministry and leadership in those early days, but even, you know, in memory of their son, Danny, who died several years ago, and in his close friendship with my friend, Erik Carlson, who is now my boss and pastor. And, you know, so all of these connections continue to be made, and they all, for me, kind of merge when I set foot in that chalet. You know, it's a beautiful space. I mean, I love it just structurally. It's a really nice building, and it's nice to be in, but so many of those connections which make Lakeside special to me all converge kind of in a spiritual way for me when I'm in that space.
That's really cool. Most people's like answer to that is, like you said initially, like campfire or something
Sure.
like that. But I love the beautiful buildings that we have too. I mean, the chalet is probably I can't pick a favorite. I have so many memories,
Right.
so many different buildings, but I do love the chalet. It is gorgeous. And like you said, I guess my initial memories of the chalet would be when I was here for staff reunions. And so it was in the winter time, and we often would be stuck in there with snow surrounding us, and it is gorgeous. If people haven't been to camp in the winter, they should come to camp in the winter because it's just beautiful. But
Yeah,
I
for
do.
sure.
I want to jump back to what you said about the campfire moving, though, because Hannah had mentioned that too. Um, the old location of the campfire, and that was the first time I heard that the campfire didn't exist where it currently exists.
Right.
Oh, it's so interesting to me. But so where main campfire is now is my favorite place on camp. Um, and now I'm realizing, because of what you said and what Hannah said and other people's stories about main campfire, is just that I don't think it's the place that's what's special about it. I don't think it's the place. I think it's what we do there. But um,
Yeah, for sure. Well, and it also, to me, like, it can be hard when you think about your experience with camp. Oftentimes it is in memories. It's in like what I experienced as a camper, or even as a staff person. I think that's where a lot of people's relationship with the camp begins, and it becomes kind of crystallized. It's like, that is camp always and forever. And that's just not how it is. It's not how it is with any organization. And camp, I mean, my feeling is that camp doesn't stop being special just because a new building comes up, or an old building goes down, or a campfire gets moved, or and it's hard. It's never fun when the thing that gives you kind of a pleasure and reminiscence about a time that was really formative for you, when that physical part goes away. But that doesn't mean that the beauty of camp and what makes camp special has to go away either. So it's about finding that balance, about honoring the spaces and the traditions that make camp what it's been for 60 years, but then also casting a vision for how we can use the space better and to a more meaningful end for everybody who comes on.
yeah, definitely. So speaking of memories, what would you say is your favorite memory at Lakeside?
So many good ones. Favorite, I'm probably gonna, one of the most meaningful and memorable moments, we were doing the Christ hike, and we did the storming, or Jesus storming the temple, and freaking out on everybody who was selling stuff in the temple. And I was Jesus that particular week. And when I had done the setup of that space, I was really intentional about making sure there weren't any breakable items, that everything was plastic or rubber or wood, that if I did kind of get a little carried away, that there wouldn't be anything happening. Well, at some point, I think maybe someone else on staff, nobody ever really copped to it, set a bunch of other things out there because they kind of thought that it didn't look quite like a marketplace. It just looked like a few random things scattered there. And so they had put like terracotta pots out, and there were a couple of, like, I don't know if they were glasses, but it was definitely a breakable container or something. And I went in and I just wailed on all of the stuff. And it was, we were on the kind of porch on the old dining hall space there, right by the fire swamp. And I let it rip, and I was breaking lots of things in the moment. And I didn't realize it was happening until I was throwing stuff to shatter and break. And the kids were like scared. They were actually scared because there were breakable things flying, and they should have been scared. And all of the adults should have been furious because this was not a safe thing that we were doing. But just kind of something had happened between when I had set things up and when we were actually acting out that scene. And I still remember to this day, like in the moment, it felt kind of wild and the strange adrenaline rush. But now thinking about it as like a youth minister or as a parent, there would have been a letter written to you in this case, the program director or the executive director, saying like, why are you so reckless and irresponsible? And who's paying for all this stuff that got broken and everything like that? So, but aside from kind of the folly of that experience, any time that there is some sort of reenactment of the life of Jesus and using the whole camp, I think that is extra meaningful. And sometimes can be done really well, and sometimes it can miss the mark a little bit. But I do think that any time the whole camp is immersed in the story of Jesus, the life and the ministry and the death and the resurrection of Jesus, and uses the whole grounds of camp. I do think that creates some pretty powerful experiences, and it did for me, certainly as a camper, and as a counselor, and then again as we've gone here in recent summers.
Yeah. The Christ hike is such an unusual experience for someone who hasn't experienced it before, and I think you're right. When we use all of camp in that way, the places on camp start to have a new meaning. At least they did for me. So like I said before, it's interesting what things you remember from your past, but I have this very vivid memory of the Christ hike. And when I was a camper, and that year when Jesus was on the cross, it was the cross that sits in front of the dining hall.
Right.
Giant cross. Yeah. And I just have this very vivid memory. I was towards the back of the group, and I can see it perfectly every time. And it's like, I don't think I would have ever paid attention to that cross or that specific field or anything unless, it was part of the Christ hike. It was part of something meaningful. And so I think the different spaces that we utilize in that can help.
It kind of infuses those spaces with new meaning, and I think that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. So we're talking about the Christ hike, which oftentimes is like this very meaningful experience for campers, and it happens at a point in the week where campers get to they're familiar with the people in their cabin, and they're more familiar with their counselor, and so they can have more of these deeper conversations about their faith and what Jesus's life and death really means. So how has Lakeside affected your faith?
Well, I think, it's there have been a variety of experiences that have kind of been faith formative for me. Some of it was just the kind of the more book learning kinds of things. I still remember working through the small catechism as a camper, and doing that in ways that it never really kind of came alive for me in my weekly confirmation classes, in my church growing up. So there were some of those moments where I was like, oh, I really get this now, because I heard it in a different place and from a different voice, and that was great. I think part of what has lately been impacting my faith in my relationship to Lakeside is kind of the faith passed down through generations. As I've gotten to know some of the folks that are on the board, but also just other people who have been connected with Lakeside for a long time, coupled with my own experience of having, lots of family members relating to Lakeside in various ways over the years. Just seeing how, faith is formed, certainly with the individual in their relationship with God, but also how faith is passed down from generation to generation to generation, and that it is manifested sometimes in the same physical space for people that didn't even know it. Like my grandpa was part of the group of pastors who helped start Lakeside 60 years ago. I was never on camp with my grandpa, which is kind of weird to me because Lakeside was such a big deal to him, and it's becoming such a big deal to me. And yet we both had some pretty profound experiences in our faith journey at this place, even though we didn't share them together. And I think that for me is just kind of just one example of the ways in which a place that is set apart from the normal everyday, like a camp, can create those kinds of experiences for families throughout generations, even if they don't all experience them at the same time.
I didn't realize your grandpa had a big part in the development of Lakeside.
Yeah, he, as always happens, as you get older, you wish you would have paid more attention to the seemingly boring stories that your grandparents told you when you were younger. Like I'm sure he told me a lot more stuff that I just don't remember because I way too, otherwise interested in other things. But yeah, and I've heard stories that my dad and aunts and uncles have told about going up there and planting a bunch of trees because it was farmland, and it was kind of the runoff area between, they got the extra water down to the lake from the higher ground, and they had to turn it into something that looked like a camp and not a cornfield. And so those early years of building that first village of cabins and putting a road that got you into the campsite, and just some of those things. There were a lot of pastors and a lot of volunteers from congregations who made that happen. And I think even in those days, for whatever week of camp people were there would just be one of the pastors would be the program director, and one of the pastors would be the cook, and and they were really just kind of, even before they had staff there, it was kind of a consortium of congregational leaders who were pooling their skills and their time and their talents to make ministry happen in a really special place. So those were, again, I wish I recalled and paid attention to more of those stories, but I know that it was a really special place for my grandparents, and then on down, 4 generations later, my kids have all had really special experiences there, and I hope that continues.
Oh, that's so cool. Okay, I have to ask you though, because you said you started talking about from generations to generation. Did you know that was supposed to be our theme this summer?
I did, now that you mention it, but I kind of didn't have that in mind when I was talking about it, because I know that the summer program and the summer emphasis has just kind of become something different. And so but now that you mention it, I do recall knowing that was the case, and I think it is a powerful testament to the ministry of Lakeside, is that so many people, and I know when you talk to Hannah, her family has been super involved throughout the years and for many generations. And I think that the way that camp has a future is to lean into some of its past, and some of those past connections that can still continue, but to really claim them as important, because every generation gets its choice on which of the family traditions to honor and to hold on to, and which need to just be let go of. And hopefully enough of the people in this generation continue to say that camp is important, and it's a place that we want to make sure is doing God's work in the world for years to come.
Yeah. I was like, did he plan that to talk about generations to generation?
I'm not that good.
Because it's interesting too, because I've spent a lot of time with that theme and the stories that were going along with it, and I'm sure we'll reuse it, whether it's next summer or another year, but because we haven't used it this year, although I am using some of those things with some of our summer staff, or would have been summer staff this year. And so I've really dug into all of that, and it's interesting because you get this little title of from generation to generation, and I was like, what is that supposed to mean?
Right.
Because it doesn't tell you a whole lot. And the kind of bigger picture of that is God keeps God's promises from generation to generation. And, thinking about that, and then thinking about everything you just said about Lakeside being a place from generation to generation, I think that God has a big piece in that of what ties all of that together. Because we've mentioned like all these stories from different people from different generations are telling, the same thing, but what holds true in all of that is that God is present at Lakeside. And so it's just all these little pieces tying together. It makes me happy.
Right. No, it's great.
So I have one more fun question for you, but before I get to that, do you have any final words, advice, anything that you'd like to share with anyone who's watching? So it could be campers, camper families, donors, staff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've covered a lot, but I think what I would want to, if people have one takeaway, it's just that camp continues to need the creative support that people can give. And oftentimes people hear that phrase and they think only money. And money's great, money's super helpful, but the camp needs everybody's gifts in whatever they are. And for some people that is financial, but in a lot of other ways, gifts of creativity or gifts of time or gifts of specific skill sets. Camp only functions if people are willing to share sacrificially with the gifts that they've been given. And I know that everybody feels pulled in a lot of different directions. I get that. I feel that, you know, I'm involved in congregational life, and I've got 3 teenagers in the house, and we're pulled in a lot of different directions, and I know a lot of people are as well. And so sometimes, because camp is a place that can be out of sight, out of mind for a lot of us, you know, if you have that 1 week in the summer when you go, or even every other year, or you just can't be on site as often, it can be easy to kind of forget that, oh yeah, Lutheran Lakeside Camp is there and is continuing to do really good things. But camp will only continue to thrive and flourish into the future if people are willing to give sacrificially of their creative gifts for the years to come. And so I would encourage everybody who's still paying attention after our lengthy conversation to consider ways that they can support the ministry of Lakeside, and to kind of put themselves out there and just say, I have an idea. Can we make this work? And even if the answer is no or not right now, doesn't mean that your gifts don't have a place at Lakeside.
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to tag on there. A lot of times people don't know where there is a need or how their skills can benefit camp. If someone just reaches out and says, hey, I really like crafts. Could you use my crafting skills?
Right.
We will find a way to use them. I actually just had somebody do that. They reached out and they're like, hey, I have extra time on my hands. I really like crafting. What can I do with that? And we brainstorm ideas together. So it can seem really intimidating to be like, I know exactly what Lakeside needs. Here you go.
Right.
Because you don't always, and that's okay. And so just being able to come up to us and say, hey, we have this particular skill set is helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, and we can always be better about putting our wants and our hopes and our needs out there, and that's something that the board is working on. Kind of being able to say, you know, okay, here's how people can be helpful. So it's a mix, but hopefully in the meantime, if you are sitting listening to this conversation and thinking like, oh yeah, I could maybe do this, please, you know, reach out to Paige. You can probably comment in the comment section below this, or you can email, you know, Brittany or Paige or Ranger or me directly, and we will be happy to put your gifts to use.
Awesome. So I like to end interviews with a fun question. I do this in my interviews with summer staff too, because I think it just kind of ends on a happy note. And I think we should always end things on a happy note. So would you rather be a doorknob or a blade of grass?
Wow. In all my years of parenting and of youth ministry of doing Would You Rather games, this is one I've not heard before. So
you can thank Abby Green for that. She was on staff and it's her favorite question. And so when I'm in doubt, I just pull that one out.
Doorknob or a blade of grass? Well, I would say in this moment, I think I would rather be a blade of grass. A blade of grass can continue to grow. Even when it's cut, a blade of grass can be pretty resilient, that even if it gets stepped on, or in the case of my yard, pooped on by my 2 dogs, or, you know, it's still, and it bounces back and is pretty resilient. Also, grass, you know, when working together with other blades of grass, can create a really beautiful space for people to relax and hang out, and it smells nice, and it gives oxygen into the air. And so I think, and especially because I'm super conscious of like touching things now that we're in this era of washing your hands more than normal, and kind of being mindful of all the surfaces you're touching and whether or not you're touching your face afterwards, I feel like a doorknob is just kind of asking for trouble in this moment. So I'll go with a blade of grass.
Well, now you are my final interview for the Camp Corner, and so I can officially say everybody I've asked that question to has said a blade of grass.
Really? Okay. Well, I guess I'm not all that original then.
I don't know. I think it's a little rigged because we're all camp people, so like outdoorsy
Sure.
seems intriguing, and COVID, and so everybody's like, Hannah, in the words of Hannah, doorknobs are dangerous. So,
Perfect.
all right. Well, thank you so much for agreeing to do this and for the work you do for Lakeside.
Well, thanks for having me on, Paige. I was happy to talk about one of my favorite places on earth with you, and grateful for all the ministry that you're doing there, even though we're not having summer programming.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you again, Erik, for joining us today and for sharing a little bit about you and for all the work you do for Lakeside. Next time, we will be joined by Albie, who is a past summer staffer. He used to be our day camp coordinator. And he has a huge passion for crafts. So next time, Albie will be leading a craft tutorial. You really don't want to miss that. So we'll see you then. Bye.